access to network is really a big part of what the competition is all about. Thanks to the sponsors again. And now I might hand over to Bill. Bill Tighe, as some of you may know, is a very experienced investor in the tech space. He's been around the market for a very long time. Early stage investor in companies such as Twitter, TweetDeck, Tango, Oxa. There's a long list of companies in which Bill has had some involvement. We're fortunate enough to have him as an adjunct professor in innovation at Curtin University, and that's really part of the formation of the competition. And also on the Curtin's Commercialisation Advisory Board. So we do have quarterly meetings where with our commercialisation advice, while they're just getting to, I'll tell you about Commercialisation Advisory Board provides high-level advice on commercialisation at Curtin. And unfortunately, Bill hasn't been able to make the last couple of meetings. One reason was that the first one I think was at Necker Island hanging out with Richard Branson. The second one, he was at Burning Man. And I think Bill underestimates the sort of exciting things that happen at our advisory board meetings. So, I don't know, Bill, you've got to get your priorities right here. Look, I'll hand it over to Bill. Please help me welcome you.
Yeah, so obviously Roman introduced the contest. Deadline's December 5th, so hope everybody that's got something is ready by that time. Yeah, so I thought today what might be fun is to talk about sort of the ambition of startup and trying to hit it. And I think if you guys follow the different tech blogs and all that, the phrase unicorn. For those of you that haven't, I'll talk a little bit more about why that phrase has evolved in the startup community and a couple of different themes. People ask me just kind of philosophy on startup, investing, startup living, what it's like to try to find a winner. And I thought I'd talk about three main things. So kind of why startup life is a little bit like surfing, and a little bit about luck and timing in trying to figure out where you point. And lastly, how if you get on the right wave at the right time, why networks really matter in trying to hit it. So the phrase unicorn, you guys have probably been seeing that a little bit more and more these days. About a year ago, there's a former client of Perkins partner on the left, and she wrote a little article on finding unicorns and defining a unicorn in terms of a startup that can hit $1 billion market valuation. And the unicorn, of course, is a mythical beast, hard to find. Don't know if they really exist, and that analogy kind of holds true because it's hard to know how many startups there are in the world and how many get started a year, but it's quite a few. And the point of that is the company can hit $1 billion market cap. You hear about a bunch of them because you remember the winners, you don't remember the ones that don't hit. But it's actually quite a small percentage that get to that level. And this, I don't know if you can read the bottom of that chart, but it's basically, this is from a year, I think a year and a half ago, about a year ago. The number of companies that hit the $1 billion market value range by year. And, it's actually a small number. It's kind of 2 to 10 per year out of, a formation pool of hundreds of thousands, if maybe low millions of startups every year. So how do you figure out how to optimize your chances to either start, be a part of, or fund a unicorn? And that's kind of the burning question, because if you can hit one of those, it's really kind of, life is about finding one unicorn. If you can do that, you're kind of done. And so when people ask me, well, how do I look at that? What is it? Is there a secret? I don't know if there is such a thing as a secret, but I think as I developed my investing over 23 years now, and in a couple of startups before that, and I think because I do a lot of this kind of water sports stuff, I use surfing analogies that I think actually make a lot of sense to me, and maybe they'll make sense to you or not, but I hope they do. And I just think that a lot of life and a lot of shot selection and startup investing or forming a company, it's actually a lot like surfing. And if you guys have, I don't know how many of you do surf, because I'm curious, how many people here surf? or in Australia, it should be a very high percentage. So for those that surf, you know what it's like, right? Like if you just hand somebody, some random person or dude or girl a board and they've never done anything, the chances of success are pretty much zero, right? Because you gotta have a little bit of training, you gotta kind of tough it out, use shapes, and you paddle to get to the right place at the right time. And then when you're learning, it's mostly about failing, because it takes a long time to figure out how to be consistent in catching the wave. And there's a lot of being a little too early, and a lot of being a little too late. And there's a phrase, being early is a lot like being wrong. Paddle, 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 and you're watching the wave come, and you're looking too far over your shoulder, you point the wrong way, you come over to the side. Or if you're too late, you just get going too late, and you watch the waves roll right under you, through you, and you can watch some kid that paddled twice get up and ride away. And then if you do it long enough and fail enough times, you'll find that every once in a while, you're in that magic moment where you're sitting on there and you paddle twice, and all of a sudden you're going. And the board's under you just cruising along, and you stand up, and it's not hard to fall down, but it's actually kind of easy. And so that is your mission. Your mission is to get yourself in shape, learn enough through failure to find that magic ride where you didn't have to work hard to catch the wave. And if you're in a position where you're not having to work very hard and the flow is kind of carrying you, you know you're in the right spot. So with that, how do you pick the wave? How do you know that where you're going to spend your energy? Because most of you in this room are going to get probably 2 or 3 shots. There might be 4 or 5 along the way, but there are going to be 2 or 3 shots in your life that just matter, where the timing lined up right, your background and preparation was right, you were thinking about the right things, and you have that shot. So the question is, how do you make sure that you're efficient in how you spend your time and energy to point your energy at the right time? Because if you're not efficient, you're just all over the place, you're never going to get it. And then the question is, how do you know when to expend your energy? And kite surfing, if you're spending your energy a lot at the wrong time, you're going to fail. You're going to be worn out when the time comes. So with that context, kind of what's the framework of what are the waves that have been rolling through technology in Silicon Valley and the world over the last kind of 2 decades or 3 decades? The foundational wave that gave Silicon Valley its name was the formation of a lot of silicon companies. And I don't know how many of you are old enough to have had to replace vacuum tubes in your radios or TVs or things like that, but these electronic items that we all use today used to be very fragile. Computers, you couldn't ship them because they were full of glass tubes, like light bulbs, that were vacuum chambers for wires and all kinds of things that would throw electrons across gaps to form logic circuits. And somebody figured out how to print those on a piece of silicon, and that was kind of the beginning of the modern era of silicon technology. And a couple of companies came out of that wave. Shockley, there were 3 guys that invented the transistor, a guy named Shockley, a guy named Rutain, and a guy named John Bardeen. And Shockley started Shockley Semiconductor out of Stanford, which is one of the seminal companies. Bardeen went on to AT&T and created a lot of kind of change there. Started with Walter Rutain. And John Bardeen ended up on the faculty of the University of Illinois, where I ended up going to college. And I ended up learning a lot about silicon when it was still kind of early. That spawned a company called Fairchild that became the seminal company that sort of the genesis of a lot of the companies that formed Silicon Valley later. You'll see these names like Intel and National AMD. All those guys were basically, all those companies were founded by first level management in that company that had great technology but was badly run. And a lot of people left to start their own companies. The 2 below Zilog came out of Intel as a microprocessor company. And I actually joined the startup of LSI Logic, which put me kind of on that first wave that gave me exposure to all the subsequent ones. So it is important to be early, but you got to be, to get the timing right. I'll have more stories about that coming up. That first wave, prior to this one, that semiconductor wave was really kind of dominated by physicists. So there were people that understood kind of chemistry and physics and how characteristics of materials would change if you put more or less electron density in parts to create kind of pools of electrons that could turn things on and off. And it was kind of weird and kind of a lot of strange, interesting academic people in it. But that way was really about putting that hardcore technology into usable form factors so that you had basically Lego blocks. And in the 70s and 80s, there were literally cataloged, there were cookbooks. They were called TTL cookbooks. So they were transistor to transistor logic cookbooks. And the books would have pages. Each page would have a set of logic elements that would be represented physically in a piece of physics expressed in plastic. So you had Lego blocks, and you would basically look at the different Legos and figure out what you want to build, and pull out different Legos and put them on a breadboard, and you make stuff. And this is the stuff you make. So the second generation, the second wave of technology was really taking those little physics blocks and turning them into things that could move little bits around, move atoms around, not bits. So we were in an age then of moving atoms. Now we're in an age of moving bits. And so in the atom era, people would basically try to figure out how to route patterns of electrons to be the expression of things on a computer, or things that would move around in switching gear. So gigantic wave of value creation around switches and routers and hubs and PCs and microcomputers, and lots and lots of companies started in that era. Once all those boxes were kind of in production and you could compute a lot of stuff in nodes and connect the compute nodes, there were business models in the next wave, which was basically stitching together the boxes to make the LAN and the WAN and the internet. And so a giant wave happened in the 90s, creating service providers. So the kind of the digital telephone companies today are the cloud and the telephony network that's digitized now that to run stuff over it. So lots of startups in that era, like Rackspace. And that wave, it became very capital intensive. It's a very mature wave now. Really hard to start a startup that competes purely on kind of digital infrastructure against the giants. So the wave that came out of that massive infrastructure build was the enablement of user interface type of company. So we've been in something for the last probably 6, 7, 8 years where all of the market value is accruing to companies that are essentially user interfaces. So if you think about what is a Facebook or a LinkedIn or a Google or hundreds and hundreds of other Twitter, Zynga, they're really just user interfaces to data coming off the cloud, and it's like how you form and structure the data that either created a lot of utility and engagement or not. And so that wave is like full force, and it became a very capital light. It's the opposite of the last wave, which was very capital intensive. Now it's sort of a capital light, put a little UI on the data cloud, figure out how people can use it, try to expand the user base, expand the functionality. And it's in full swing, very fragmented kind of business. I think we're kind of maybe 3 or 4 years into this wave, which is what I call this the big data wave and the asset virtualization wave, where you took the kinds of things that UI companies did. In any category, the winner in the UI wave was the one that understood their data better than their competitors. And the art and science of managing growth or growth hacking, growth and engagement, those kinds of things were built on a data science layer, which is now spreading itself into bricks and mortar businesses and creating new opportunities in physical businesses, say like an Uber or an Airbnb. Those are really just, in a way, you could say they're data science companies where the endpoint isn't a mobile phone, but it's a car or it's an empty vacation rental. So it's the increase of efficiency of asset deployment because you understand the data. And so a lot of value is getting both created and locked in physical assets that are kind of sitting there empty and we're just underutilized. And I think this wave has a lot of legs. And these companies, you may not know all of them, but like a Tableau or Splunk, Tableau's market values range from probably 4 to 7 billion. It went public like a year and a half ago. on 200 million in revenue. Splunk is probably 7 to 13 billion on about 250 million of revenue. So these aren't companies trading at 10 times earnings. These are companies trading at 20 to 30 times sales without earnings, because the investment pools on Wall Street recognize the same thing that some of the other investors do, that in this wave, somewhere is going to be a company that is sort of the modern displacement of Oracle, or kind of the database industry, which I don't know how many companies are in that segment, but there are quite a lot. And if you took the market cap of Oracle and every other sort of data management company in the old infrastructure, I'll bet there's 1,000 billion of market cap there. And so it's a very big wave relative to some of the other stuff that we've seen. So I think that's providing the kinds of market caps that you see today. So how do you figure out how you get on to one of those waves? And I love this quote from Woody Allen. I don't know if you know who he is, but he said, kind of an older American actor. And I don't know if that quote was actually copyright, because the quote, as I remember, it was 80% of life is just showing up. And yeah, you can substitute the word success if that's actually the correct one, but in a way that's kind of true. You just have to be present. So is it presence? And if it's not just presence, what is luck? Is it smart? How do you know beyond just showing up where to point your energy? But you got to show up in the right place. So I always say that it's kind of about 80% of life is just showing up. And is it smart or is it lucky? I think luck has something to do with it for sure. But I define luck as being smart enough to put yourself in the path of luck. Or you just be smart enough to know where to go, so that luck hits you in the face with a 2x4. And I often, I talk about that often with companies. Like sometimes I'll see a company that's just hitting it, and I'll say, man, they were in the right place at the right time. Because sometimes they weren't strategically smart to put themselves on the chessboard in front of the wave, but they just happened to be standing there. And then, boom, the 2x4 of luck hits them in the forehead, and off they go. And they're standing up on that board riding, and their job is to just not fall off. And that happens occasionally, but it doesn't happen a lot. But if you can kind of be very observant about the things around you, what's happening, the timing trends, the pieces of infrastructure that enable the next wave, you might more often not be able to twist the odds a little bit and put yourself in the path of luck. So at a personal level, I mentioned, like for me, people ask me, well, how did you end up doing what you're doing? So this is a little bit of a story of how that happened. But LSI Logic, I mentioned that company, that was the first startup I joined. So, and I have to say, at that age, I was in my kind of like late teens, early 20s, as I started to figure out I wanted to be working on silicon. And I don't know why I chose that, but I did. And at that point, I started working on projects I was kind of a hardware hacker, and I got hired. I had to pay for college by doing contract work. So I ended up doing contract work, taking like systems designs of those detailed cookbook things that I mentioned and shrinking them down logically into smaller blocks, so that in the end I had a job where I had to take a 7-board computer system and shrink it into a 2x4x6 module to fit into the F-16. And I couldn't figure out how to do that all by myself. So I started looking for tools, and I found this little 1-year-old startup in Silicon Valley that had this program you could run on a computer terminal connected to a mainframe. It was LSI Logic, and I got good at using it. So I ended up becoming a marketing guy. And then it put me on this path. I was like dead center in this first wave, and I had the pleasure of looking back. It's like crazy that I actually got to meet and hang out with Gordon Moore and Keith Conrad and Intel and the whole crew, because the guy that started LSI Logic had been the CEO of Fairchild, so he was plugged into that whole network, and that put me right into that wave to do this one. So I don't know if you guys ever heard about this company. I did not found this company, but it was a creation of the government of Taiwan, and I was like this young kid in Silicon Valley that had silicon experience, and I was one of the only people willing to move to Taiwan to help them put together this thing. Boom, it's a freaking unicorn. And I had no idea at the time to be one, but I think it floats around I think it might be the 12th largest tech company in the world now with a market value around 110 billion. And that definitely was not smart. So that was a 2x4 of luck hitting that country in the head, because it was the right time for something like that to happen. And I just happened to be, I guess, of the right background. So it was all the preparation I did paddling on my board to know the space. And I just had enough intuition to know that it was possible and worth trying. And that's been kind of a pattern over and over. So as the next wave happened, the kind of the equipment wave, I was more of an investor, and I funded a lot of companies that made gear, so Tarion and cable modems or premises, which is the WAN access box, but funding things that I needed for my other companies to connect their infrastructure to the world communication system. Just kind of filling needs for stuff that I could see. And then as the internet really started to hit, I had that burning kind of instinct, like, there's this wave is going to be big. And I wanted a bigger piece of it than just kind of investing in things. So I ended up founding a company, and I ended up as the founding CEO of a company that built data center, much like Rackspace actually. People used to call us the Exodus of Asia. And we had, and Exodus went bankrupt, by the way. We didn't go bankrupt, but Exodus basically overrated, but it was like the largest market cap early mover in that space, and they took on way too much debt and they ended up dying. But we built data centers in throughout Southeast Asia, and the value prop was pretty easy for us because I was sitting right in Silicon Valley with all these web companies that had raised lots and lots of money, that had global domination ambitions, and they wanted to expand every part of the world. And I don't speak Chinese, but neither did they. And so we basically built data centers all over Asia, and I just said, look, I can give you, here's a list. Here's a list of 13 countries. You pick 2, you pick 10, you pick 7. You just tell me, $10,000 a month. Each one, I'll set it up for you. One phone call to area code 650, you're done. And it was a value prop that was very easy at the time, because at that time, the communications links across the ocean were kind of constrained. It was very expensive to send bandwidth across, so it's easier to copy your software, cache it, and clone it. And so we basically became the infrastructure that would take software in a server, localize it, and then just port it to different countries. And pretty easy business model at the time. The company went public right at, a little after the peak. It actually got public in August of 2000, after the peak in March. And it was around for quite a while, but the company ended up getting carved up to be data centers for a whole bunch of different countries throughout Southeast Asia. The UI wave was another one where I had no familiarity at the beginning, because I was, at the time I was more focused on atoms than bits. I understood how to move things around in a physical sense, but kind of the pure software stuff wasn't really my game yet. And so I wanted to kind of figure it out, less by starting a company, but by investing. And I started to do a lot of experimentation. And the firm, I set up an office for Charles River Ventures, and ended up seeding Twitter. And along with that, I funded a company called TweetDeck. And then I started really just trying to figure out, okay, where on this frothy, crazy wave of all these kids, because there used to be the companies I worked with were a lot of older guys that really understood machinery. And now all of a sudden I had to deal with a lot of 20-year-olds that had ideas for apps. And so I started the OzAPP, among other things, but I also started to just fund things that I thought were spaces that made logical sense to me. And I ended up funding a couple of other ones. So Voxer and Tango in 2012 were the 12th and 30th most downloaded apps of that year. And they've gone on, Tango is the unicorn, it's valued at $1 billion or so. And I'm still funding some things in that space, but I've kind of moved on to the next wave, which we talked about, the big data wave. So this was another one where I thought, I just had a sense it's going to be a large wave, and I wanted to have more than a sprinkling of pieces of a bunch of little pieces of companies. And so I founded this one, and I think for those of you who were here last year, I talked about it last year too. This is a big data company, so I had to learn. I can't say I really learned, but I wanted to learn about the new. If you guys will hear that buzzword, but it's for technologists. It's a very interesting. It's not very new anymore. It's like 10 or 15 years old, but the timing of that wave has come. And it's a great architectural implementation to store unstructured data as opposed to kind of tables and databases. And I wanted to look and really figure out what are the implications of a change in technology like that. What can it do? What's it good for? How do you apply it? And networked my way to a couple, like a founder of the world's largest user group. And together we figured out how to build a company out of it that's a service. A year ago at this time, when I came out here to talk about it, the company had launched like a year and a half prior. And it's been, you know, it hasn't been like 2x4 luck in the forehead, but it's like 2x4 luck in the behind. It's kind of pushed us along. The company now, I think at that point, we had a year ago, customers had uploaded 1 trillion rows of data in the first year and a half. And it was a magical ride. When we launched it, I think we had 1 billion rows of data in the first 6 months, which sounded like a lot at the time. And then in the next 4 months, customers uploaded 100 billion. So we grew up by a factor of 100 in the next 4 months. And then the next 5 months was 1 trillion. And now it's like and so last year at this time, we had just kind of crossed over 1 trillion rows of data. A year later, we're at 9. So we've grown another 800% in a year. The company that, you know, from a standing start of trying to charge revenue about a year and 2 months ago, we're running about $700,000 of monthly recurring revenue, growing about 25% per sequential quarter, which is from a startup perspective, it's pretty amazing actually. And I've had lots of companies grow user bases, but I haven't had too many companies at 2 years old growing 25% a quarter sequentially in revenue. This one feels like it's in the right place. But anyway, so where am I headed next? Or what are the things that I think are interesting? The big data wave, I think, has a lot of legs. So I don't know how much, you know, how many people here consider themselves either data scientists or have access to data scientists to help fill out a business that you have an idea on. But I think this was